The Quinn Hughes situation has gotten much, much worse. With Hughes being a pending free agent after the 2020 season, the Canucks have been spiraling to try to keep him long term. But with Hughes becoming not just one of the best defensemen in the NHL, but one of the best players, that's made it a lot more difficult. But what has made things even worse is that this Canucks season has been an absolute disaster from head to toe, resulting in a Quinn Hughes that looks absolutely disillusioned as the captain of the team. Not just with his shenanigans staring into nothing on the bench, but when it comes to his actual on-ice play, some pretty big warning signs. And for the first time, I think, in his NHL career, a lack of effort in shifts. Let's talk about it. Hughes has been the talk of the town over the last month when it comes to his future in Vancouver, not just with the Canucks potentially opening up trades to veterans, but now it seems more likely than ever that Quinn Hughes eventually gets dealt. As the Canucks ponder a full rebuild, Quinn Hughes is really the biggest domino. They have some decent other veterans they could trade, especially on the defense, but if they lose Quinn Hughes, it's basically over with this core and era of the team. Just a few weeks ago, we heard that Vancouver wasn't considering trading Quinn Hughes whatsoever, that wasn't going to happen, but the more we get into the season, the more scary everything becomes. When you look at the Canucks so far, it's just been a total disappointment. Third last among all NHL teams with just 23 points in 27 games, plus a 2-6-2 record over their last 10. Sure, they got a couple injuries, especially on the goaltending department, but every single team has injuries at this stage of the season, and it's absolutely not an excuse. The absolute worst thing that could have happened this season, though, whether they made the playoffs or didn't, was that Quinn Hughes' future would be in question, that he would be worried about his future, and that we would see that on the ice. And quite frankly, especially over the last week or so, the effort level just has been brutal. The first clip I saw about this came from Bick Nazar of Canucks Central, with a clip from him against San Jose on the power play. Wasn't the worst clip in the world in my opinion, but a couple of moments where you definitely wanted some more urgency. But the much worse clip in my opinion came with the recent Avs versus Canucks game. This one with the Canucks down 2 goals with 12 minutes to go in the third. You would think everybody would be out there trying their best, but here's Quinn Hughes kind of leisurely getting back into the play and skating away from the rebound as well after it's made. This just looks like a Quinn Hughes that is absolutely done with this team, and for lack of a better word, kind of quitting on the play. A lot of people have said it, but it looked very JT Miller-esque when he was at his worst in Vancouver, where he was just floating out there with no care, really no urgency in the world. Maybe not as bad as JT Miller, but my goodness, it's pretty close. But as the captain for Vancouver and the way it looks way worse than JT Miller did. When you're the leader of that Canucks team, when you are the franchise face, you can never have shifts like that, really, especially ones where it's very clear that you're just so frustrated, you aren't even able to impact the play. You're not even concerned with what's going on anymore, and that's what's most brutal here. Quinn Hughes has almost always looked like he's depressed out there on the ice, but it hasn't really shown in his actual play and the actions he has out there, except now it's starting to. And when you have a Quinn Hughes that's been injured throughout this year and also isn't putting in 100% effort either, the Canucks have basically no chance at being anywhere competitive. And apparently it's gotten so bad in terms of a body language standpoint that the actual Canucks management as well have had to talk to Quinn Hughes personally about this issue. Jason Bro getting us a good deep dive into the situation in a report from Elliotte Friedman saying that this team has been so dysfunctional that you can't just ignore how Hughes looked today, especially after Elliotte Friedman just reported that the team talked to him about his body language. But this quote is just brutal from Elliotte Friedman, saying, "We can guess where this is going. Although several sources push back hard, very hard, on the idea he's already made a decision, the Canucks are ready for the possibility that he would leave. But Hughes has looked unhappy, although I think there was a conversation addressing that. Your captain must project properly." The worst part about this quote, though, is that this was on November 28th. This was before the Colorado game, where I would say the body language at points was probably at its worst. As Elliotte goes on to say, eventually there will be a discussion about his future. I thought Olympic break, but it might be sooner. Obviously, we'll have a huge say over the process, but elite engines aren't available often, and interested parties won't screw around when and if the day comes. Coming from the mouth of Elliotte Friedman, who's one of the rare insiders these days that isn't in the business of making hyperbolic statements every single second, that's just rough to see. The fact that the Canucks themselves have had to go to Quinn Hughes personally as the captain of the team and sit him down, talk to him about the body language, about his demeanor on the ice, I think that does say a lot. I believe that Quinn Hughes can be a great leader. He was made captain for a reason in Vancouver, and I think he has done some great things leading that team by example, but the team is at its worst moment, and Quinn Hughes is having that affect his play. It's having him affect his mood, and that's something that I just don't think can be happening. In all honesty, that's, I think, the biggest reason why I think we will eventually see a Quinn Hughes trade, because for Vancouver beforehand, it didn't seem like they had any interest in wanting to trade him, but now with these concerns over effort, with him even being invested in Vancouver long-term, not even just long-term, right now, today, it seems like he's barely invested, that's what could really spur a change. The big thing, though, is that I don't think Quinn Hughes has been completely lost. Even in that Colorado game, he had some magical moments with his edges and was still able to create some interesting offensive moments. Just the Quinn Hughes that we've come to expect in all three zones hasn't quite been there recently, especially when it comes to the effort. That's, I think, the biggest thing that concerns me the most. Earlier in his career, he wasn't the greatest defensively, but I don't think it was for a lack of effort. Now, we're seeing a lack of effort. Personally, I don't think we're going to see a Quinn Hughes trade tomorrow, but the more this goes on, the more likely I think a deadline deal could happen, or at the very least, a trade over the summer. The Canucks still have him for the next year and a half, but I think a decision will have to be made here, and a pretty uncomfortable one, in all honesty. The big thing is that Quinn Hughes is still 26 years old, and even with all these issues, with him being banged up throughout this year, with him having lackluster effort at points, he's still a point-per-game defenseman with 22 points in 22 games on this Vancouver team that just simply cannot score to save their lives. So even though there is issues there, don't get it confused, Quinn Hughes is still a transformative piece. And if anything, the Canucks have only had a modicum of success recently because of Quinn Hughes. Whenever that success does come, he's usually the one leading the way, especially in 2024. What he was able to do back that season, 92 points in 82 games, that's the type of player I think we will see once he is dealt, because it just doesn't seem like his head and heart is in it right now. Now, there's two sides to the coin with Quinn Hughes right now that I wanted to get into because I find it fascinating. Because on one hand, I do think the effort level as a captain for any NHL team is just pretty unacceptable. I get that the Canucks are in a bad position. I get that you've been injured throughout this year. It's been a frustrating season. But no matter what, I think as the captain for a team, you need to lead your team by example, not just with the play on the ice, but your body language, how much you're bringing positivity to the room. And I don't know if Quinn Hughes has been able to do that recently. But I will say, at the same time, if I was the captain of the Canucks, and I had to go through this team year after year just being awful around me every single season, carrying them so much, and having the frustrations of this year and the management just being a complete joke year after year after year, yeah, I'd be pretty pissed off too. So even though I don't think it is acceptable for Quinn Hughes to play this way and to have his demeanor like it is, I do understand where it's coming from. I do know why it is happening, because it would happen to most players in this situation. Most players in the Canucks look pretty disheartened right now, not just Quinn. There is just some rot in that Vancouver system that just needs to be expelled, because the fact that you could have a player like Quinn Hughes talked about in a video like this as a potential trade candidate, it should have the Canucks be relocated. It's genuinely that baffling. He's not on the McDavid level of player, but this is probably the most talented player the Canucks have ever had in their franchise history, especially when it comes to defensemen. And the fact that there is a pretty good chance, I would say a better chance of him leaving than staying now, that's unacceptable. As Elliot Freeman mentioned, though, if there were to be a trade, if there were to be some action, almost every single team out there is going to be acquiring about him, but I do think the teams that could be the most interested and the most likely to trade for him are pretty fascinating. But let's get into the debate that you guys came for. If a Quinn Hughes trade were to happen, who do I see as the most likely options, and who do I think actually trades for him in the end? Now, if we're just going off of likelihood, both in terms of who would want Quinn Hughes and where he'd want to go, obviously Detroit makes a ton of sense. Elliot Freeman recently talked about the potential of him going to Detroit, saying if he gets traded, it won't be for unproven assets. Talk on Detroit as a destination being high on a possible trade list. They have centers, and not depth centers, that could be a part of the return. That's really the big thing that I think any Quinn Hughes trade hinges on, is the centers that could be going back. Detroit, I don't think has anybody perfect for a Hughes trade, but maybe we see both a Marco Kasper and a Nate Danielson get dealt, two really young centers that are still finding their games. Kasper has had an unfortunate season up to this point, both in terms of the luck and the play. Just 3 goals and 3 points in 27 games. But last year, I thought was rounding himself out into a really interesting middle six piece. Nate Danielson, bursting onto the scene this year, hasn't put up monster point totals, but 4 points through 12 games, as something that is just now entering the NHL. Ain't half bad, especially for the minutes he's getting. I think he's played pretty well there too. So some interesting options here for the Canucks, but those are the two guys I think they target the most. But Detroit, I think, just makes a lot of sense, not just for the players they can give up, but just the opportunity they'd be able to give a player like Quinn Hughes. He would be perfect for that defense, needing that superstar offensive puck mover, and especially would make a player like Moritz Seider's job a lot easier. Even though I don't think it's going to be a million first-round picks in every franchise player you do have, I think the Quinn Hughes trade is going to be one of the biggest we see in recent NHL memory, and especially a team like Detroit would have to pay up quite a bit. In terms of what the value I think could look like, I think Axel Sandin-Pellikka would also be one of the cornerstones of the deal, being a younger offensive puck-moving defenseman that can kind of play the role that Quinn Hughes would have, even though I don't see him being quite at that level. But I also would see another center going back like a Marco Kasper as well. Maybe another roster player like an Albert Johansson potentially for that defense, or like a JT Compher or something, and then a first-round pick on top of that. Though, without a roster player, maybe it's a Nate Danielson and Kasper and Axel Sandin-Pellikka and no pick. Depends how Detroit wants to play it, but they certainly have the prospect pool that Vancouver would appreciate. Carolina is a team that I think would make a ton of sense, especially if we were to see an offseason trade. I think a player like Alex Nikishin would be perfect for Vancouver, and that's somebody that I think they would be pretty interested in. On top of this, the prospect pool they have there already. I don't know if it would be a deadline deal since Carolina is doing pretty well right now, but Gostisbehere isn't going to be scoring as much as he is forever, so maybe that long-term offensive piece could be interesting there too. Philadelphia, we've heard a lot about them being interested in Quinn Hughes, Hughes liking the Canucks, liking, of course, Rick Tocchet and his time there with the Canucks, so maybe that's something that could work out. Though I do think the Flyers have a little bit less assets than the Canes do in terms of guys I think the Canucks really would want now. Especially since Philadelphia is another team that doesn't have the greatest center crop to work with right now. Maybe a Michkov or something would be a part of the deal, but I kind of doubt that in terms of what Vancouver would want personally. So that's, I think, the biggest barrier for an actual deal there. Now, New Jersey, of course, is going to be talked about a ton with the Luke Hughes and Jack Hughes connection there, and I do think they have some interesting options to trade. Simone Nemec, I think, could be interesting as maybe a cornerstone offensive piece going back. You also have a Dawson Mercer who's played really well this season. I'm not sure how likely they are to actually deal him, but that's, I think, one of the bigger asks that Vancouver would eventually want. It would be a lot for New Jersey, but I think the Vancouver Canucks also know that Quinn Hughes wants to go to the Devils, so I think they make it just a bit harder for them. One wild card to me is the St. Louis Blues. They're a team that has a lot of interesting prospects and a lot of options to give, both in the defense and the forward group, though I do think it would lean more offensive on the forward side. A Dalibor Dvorsky could be somebody going back, especially if it's an offseason trade and Dvorsky continues to win a top middle six spot. Maybe a Jordan Kyrou, maybe that's where they end up getting rid of him. There's some options there, especially on the wings for the Canucks, though I think a player like Dalibor Dvorsky would be one of the big ones they'd go after. The Blues just seem like a good trade partner to me because of the assets they have that are both young and pretty decently proven up to this point, and St. Louis is also pretty desperate and in a position of need, just like the Canucks are right now. So a player like Dvorsky potentially getting dealt would be the craziest thing in the world to me. Plus, if they wanted to go on the more defensive end, even though Philip Broberg has been very good for them, if that's what Vancouver really wants as an ask, I feel like St. Louis would be in a position to potentially accept that, at least if there's not too much more being added on top of that. Even a player like Pavel Buchnevich, who kind of feels like he needs a change of scenery, could potentially be dealt. Heck, even Braden Shen, if the Canucks are stupid and want to go a bit older with the trade, really want to go for proven assets, Shen as a center up the middle, I don't think is the greatest player in the world right now, but as like a third-line center could be okay, even though the Canucks would probably want to play him a bit higher than that. All I'm saying is that there's options here, and I feel like St. Louis, in terms of the Quinn Hughes options, maybe doesn't get talked about enough here. The one thing I do know for sure is that he's not going to be a Toronto Maple Leaf, even though he would be basically perfect for that team right now, exactly the type of player they need. Toronto actually just doesn't have the assets, really, to trade for a player of the magnitude of Quinn Hughes. The picks aren't there, the prospects aren't there, nothing is really there. But man, I just kind of hate talking about this because I want to see the Canucks do well. I want to see them actually be a successful franchise, but I think the writing's kind of on the wall right now. Quinn Hughes just is disgruntled, he's unhappy, and quite frankly, I don't think the Canucks are going to be good enough over the next couple of years to change Quinn Hughes' mind. Either the Canucks lose him in free agency, or we see a trade over the next year. This is going to get interesting. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on the Quinn Hughes situation so far, and what do you think eventually happens? Do you think the Canucks somehow find a way to re-sign him? Do you think he gets traded? Where do you think he gets traded to? Let me know your thoughts down below on that. And of course, share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Click on this card for all of my trade content right in one playlist, and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, notification bell if you haven't already. Plus, if you guys want some more videos, you can become a channel member here by hitting the join button next to the subscribe button, or hitting the link in the description down below. I'll have a Q&A out pretty soon as well, answering some of your member questions, so that'll be a ton of fun, so look out for that. But I will see you guys in the next one. Make sure you guys have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.